Ahoy! It's your buddy Hambone here, and I'm back again with a brand new coupon code from our friends over at Noble Night Games. This month, the code is Arcana, and it's a long one. It's running from now all the way through September 14th, and it's good for 10% off orders of $10 or more, online or in person. Arcana is the code. And let's face it, everybody, it's summertime. It's fun time. It's time to get back together with your friends and family, maybe do some grilling and chilling and ripping some board games or tabletop RPGs. And for all your tabletop RPGs, board games, dice, and Magic the Gathering needs, look no further than Noble Night Games. Noble Night also has a killer trading program, so if you need to free up a little space on your shelf and add a little cash to your wallet so you can buy more games, Noble Night is where it's at. And there's more details on that on their website. In the meantime, the code is Arcana, good from now all the way through September 14th from our friends over at Noble Night Games.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. When he said dungeon, I thought he was just really excited to play D&D. Stu Horvath.
It's right there in the name. There's an exclamation point at the end of the name. There's a couple games like this that I find it really annoying to write about. Troika is one of them because Troika has the exclamation point. So when you italicize it, you got to include the exclamation point and then put a period after it. And it just looks wrong to me, you know?
Yeah, especially because you're coming off hot from the italicization.
Yeah.
It's funny, too, because I remember specifically reading an article because, dear listener, I am not a person who has studied writing. I just do it. And, I was like, maybe I could do to get a little better at writing, because I'm certainly never going back to college. And I was like, Googling some stuff and reading some things. And apparently back in the day, like, people used to thumb their noses up at the exclamation point. Like, it was not used or intended for use as it is used so widely now.
Yeah, that is true. Now, I am an overuser of the exclamation point in emails, but I also feel bad about it. I try and limit myself to no more than 3 exclamation points in a single email, because I think it just makes me sound like a kook.
Yeah, I mean, what I learned about is like, this is how you express excitement. And to be fair, everybody is an overuser of the exclamation point. I mean, I am personally shocked and surprised that we have not fully descended into conversations using nothing but emojis. And I figure we're like 2 to 3 Apple updates away from having every emoji that we possibly need to express what we need to do. Like, once they have the emoji for it's over.
That's what Carrie Fisher's Twitter feed was all. It was just rebuses of emojis.
God bless her. I miss you every day, Carrie. Love you. Love you, girl. Anyway, we're talking about Dungeon! Exclamation point.
Yeah, so Dungeon's interesting to me. It's a board game. It was designed by Dave Megarry, who was part of the Midwest Military Simulation Association, which was basically the Dave Arneson group out of Twin Cities, developed Blackmore, basically one part of the peanut butter and chocolate combination that creates Dungeons and Dragons.
2 great flavors that go great together, man.
Right. So he's in the Blackmore group. I guess Dungeon kind of comes out of a Bronstein game run by Dave Wesley. So he's right there at the front of it. He had a working prototype in 1972. So like, as much as like you think that Dungeons and Dragons is this thing that comes out of nowhere, those guys were all talking about similar stuff and creating similar sorts of games that were all kind of in the mix. I think that it's hard to see where the influence, which direction the influence is flowing from. Like, is Dungeons and Dragons influenced by Dungeon, or is Dungeons and Dragons influencing Dungeon? And I think it's both. And I think that's sort of the coolest part about Dungeon, is that it sort of distills a lot of the early Dungeons and Dragons experience into a board game. And from this board game, which I mean, it's fine. It's not really my thing. It was never really my thing. I think that like kids really enjoy the game. I think that it's like an entry level board game, but I never had it as like a young kid, and it didn't have the tooth that I wanted from that sort of board game when I did finally get a copy. But from this springs adventure dungeon crawl board games. So like Hero Quest comes out of this. All of what's the hot one? Gloomhaven.
Gloomhaven. Man, people love that Gloomhaven.
Yeah, you don't get to Gloomhaven without having Dungeon back in 74 or 75. It was prototyped in 72. I think the first edition comes out in 75, but it was right there in co-development basically with Dungeons and Dragons. It's a very simple game. There's 4 different characters in the first edition. The reason we're talking about it is I finally got a copy of a first-ish edition from 75.
Yeah, because I always thought you had a copy floating around that looked very old.
Well, I have a bunch of copies. This thing has been printed and reprinted by TSR and Hasbro over and over and over again. There's an Arrow Lotus cover, which is maybe my favorite. There's one that I think uses a Parkinson dragon, and there might be a Rosloff cover. And then there's a later Eastleigh cover, and they all are slightly different. They're all reconfigured. They're all really big boxes. The original, I just got it, is a very small, basically like D&D box set size. So like, 8.5 by 11 by 1 inch. It has such good art. It's like just purple, black, and red and white. And it's like a literal like dungeon with skeletons hanging in manacles. It's so good.
Now that's a cover of a game I'd like to play.
But it's super, super simple. I got a kick out of the fact that there's 4 characters that you can take, that you can play: the elf, the wizard, the hero, and the superhero.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're just fighters of different power levels. Hero and superhero are also terms that are used in RuneQuest. It's just an interesting nomenclature that is just, we've just moved so beyond that like superhero is the comic books, like Spider-Man and Captain America. We don't think of it as just like Hercules is a superhero in a way.
You know what? And it's very funny that you mentioned that, because in a lot of ways, all the gods of the Parthenon were superheroes.
Yeah.
But like, we don't think of them as superheroes because we see them as gods, because that's how they're referred to. They're not referred to as superheroes or even heroes. They're referred to like gods.
Yeah. Well, that's Grant Morrison's book, Super Gods, is like all about that idea that the modern mythology and the conflation of mythology and superhero stories and all that stuff. Tangent. We're just talking about a board game. And it basically, you take a character, you set the board up. It's just a big maze of rooms and connecting corridors. And you set up tiles face down in every room where there's a monster. You walk into a room, you fight the monster. You either fight the monster and win, have a standoff, or it wins and you have to run, leave your treasure behind. If you kill it, you get treasure. And that is the game. It's really super simple. It can get competitive against the other players, and there's secret doors. It really is a pretty simple, like, time-consuming game. It's a pastime. It really is designed to sort of to consume a lot of time and kind of like facilitate conversation while you're doing something else. And I think that you could use it as a base for something more elaborate, which might have been Megarry's plan, but it has just become sort of, like I said, a staple of in the old Hercules TV show. There's Hercules, but then there's the buddy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of characters from that show, but I know what you're talking about.
Or like Xena. Xena's got like the blonde lady who hangs out with her.
Her name was Gabrielle.
Gabrielle.
They also had Autolycus, Prince of Thieves. They had Jocks of the Mighty, which was Ted Raimi. Let me talk to you about which show I was actually a fan of. Like, yeah, Hercules had like that jobber guy who was like thankful to be on a show like Hercules because it was either that or The Bold and the Beautiful. I don't know which paid better at the time. However, you probably should have went to Bold and the Beautiful because no one will ever rewatch Hercules again. Whereas Xena Warrior Princess, man, I'll tell you. And it wasn't even about the fact that like Lucy Lawless was like super hot and like kicking people's asses all the time. It was a solid fantasy show. They had some great storylines in there. They had some great long running storylines in there. There were consequences to people's actions. Fucking Bruce Campbell was in it. So right there, high marks, and the worst parts of the show, honest to God, were when Hercules would cross over, because even before we found out what he was all about, like later in life and like, whatever deity you describe to years of, hell that we're in now, like he was always kind of like a wet blanket.
Yeah.
Compared to Xena. It's like, I'm strong. My dad's a god. I got daddy issues. Wow. Like Xena had problems and she was helping people solve theirs. Anyway, I digress.
So Gabrielle was Xena's constant companion, right?
Thank you. Yes.
That is the same relationship between Dungeons and Dragons and the Dungeon board game. They feel to be like constant companions through the years. It has gone through as many makeovers as D&D, if not more, and it is still out there to this day. Now it has, the characters are very much more in line with D&D. Like there's Paladin and Thief, a Wizard and Fighter, I think, and they all have a male and a female miniature option, which is pretty cool.
Because nothing Daddy Hasbro loves more than synergy. Yes. Like I'm sure when the Dungeons and Dragons new movie comes out, there'll be another version of Dungeon ! That will be featuring probably characters from that. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now on Amazon. You can get it right now on Amazon for $14.29. There's Drist on the cover and a red dragon.
Yeah, it's right in the pocket of selling. It's just easy to market. It is the perfect filler for like when you can't get everybody together for your D&D game. Oh, okay, we'll hang out, we'll have some peanuts, and we'll play a game of Dungeon, and it'll be fun.
Well, that was gonna be my next question. But is it fun?
Not for me. Like I said, I don't think that it is as complex. I like to see lots of interacting systems, and Power Grid is my favorite board game.
Yeah, I get you.
Power Grid is not everybody's favorite board game. It is an acquired taste, and you have to kind of like want to play it. Dungeon is sort of like the tabletop role-playing equivalent of like a Monopoly. It's on everybody's shelf. Everybody's got a copy. It can come out. It's easy to play. Theoretically, it doesn't have all the baggage that Monopoly has, and the rules, you have to actually read the rules to play it.
Yeah, Dungeon's never torn a family apart.
Yeah,
I got you.
But it's just like it's a family board game. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not toothy enough for me. I think it does what it does. It does really well, and I think this kind of casual game has a place on the shelf.
Well, very cool. Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Dungeon!
My kid's gonna like it. We're gonna play the Amazing Labyrinth from Ravenberger later today, and he's like so excited to play it. This is like Dungeon is like the next step. Once he's a little bit older, like read, and like it's like an entryway into a wider world, and it's super important for that.
That is so cool. Well, this has been another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you online?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG. I should probably, there's so many covers of these. I should just do a week of Dungeon covers now that I got the first one
in 2024.
Yeah.
You can find me on the Twitter, on the Instagram, and on the TikTok. I post mostly on Instagram, though, at John McGuire RPG. You can also check out my books over at Exalted Funeral if you're interested in getting in on 3-2 in action. Speaking of 3-2 in action, I am going to make a last-minute run at Zine Quest 4. Gio and I have an amazing found footage horror RPG called The Devil in New Jersey that we are kicking off for Zine Quest 4 on August the 4th. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And if you really like the show, why not become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got early release episodes. We got a behind-the-scenes look at 3-2 in action. We've got a behind-the-scenes look at Stu's book called Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground, a guide to tabletop role-playing games from D&D to Mothership.
Wow.
Huh?
That was pretty. Did you have it written in front of you?
Did I write it down? No. Did I screenshot the MIT Press announcement that your book was coming out? I sure did. Copied it into my Apple Notes, and I was ready for it today.
Better you than me. If I was waiting for it, I was just like, I'm going to screw it up again. We started playing games with our patrons. I am going to be running DCC. I'm going to be running Chill in October. I got some other cool things in the works. I don't just run my game. I actually run other systems for our patrons. And we got a killer Discord community that is very positive, very cool, and we would absolutely love for you to be a part of it. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.